Pirated multicarts for the NES were very popular and widespread back in the day, so it's really hard to believe that anyone out there hasn't played TwinBee by now. TwinBee is one of the earliest examples of a cute-em-up style shooter, where in place of an actual spaceship, you control the very cartoony TwinBee instead. And in place of your typical military or alien adversaries, you'll find yourself up against fearsome vegetables. And kitchenware. Forks can be pointy after all. TwinBee was originally released in 1985 in arcades, but was later ported to the Famicom in 1986. The Famicom version obviously suffers when it comes to visuals and sound. However, the core mechanics of the game remain entirely intact. Taking a page from Namco's 1982 classic Xevious, TwinBee has you shooting enemies both in the air and on the ground. However, TwinBee does take it a step further by allowing you to power up your ship. In order to do this, you need to collect bells, which are shot out of the clouds. Shooting these bells a certain amount of times will change the color of the bells, and each color has a different effect. A blue bell gives you more speed, a white bell will give you a twin shot, a flashing red bell gives you 2 options, and a solid red bell gives you a force field. Otherwise, the bell will always be cream-colored and can be collected for points. As long as you don't miss a bell, the score will increase as well, starting at 500 points, growing to 1,000, then 5,000, to a maximum of 10,000 points per bell. One thing to keep in mind about the bells though is that if you keep shooting them, they'll eventually turn into a pink bee, which will kill you automatically if you get hit. However, if you shoot it, you get a massive amount of points. Defeating enemies on the ground will sometimes yield power-ups as well. A wrapped candy will give you a 3-way shot, and a white star will clear all airborne enemies and their shots off screen. Otherwise, ground-based enemies usually leave food behind, such as apples or cherries. Every now and again, though, you'll find a bottle of milk in place of a fruit. These bottles of milk will give you an extra life. TwinBee's power-up system isn't the only way that it shakes things up. Normally, getting hit by an errant enemy bullet spells doom for your character. Not so in TwinBee, as if you do get hit by just the bullets, you'll lose your arms and you won't be able to fire stuff at the ground. However, after only the first time of getting hit, if you can catch the ambulance unit, you can restore your arms. If you get hit again in this manner though, you'll have to do without them. And finally, if you get hit without any arms, well, scratch 1 life. This recovery system really makes TwinBee stand out from other shooters of its time. If you get hit by an enemy, it's also 1 life down for you as well, with no chance of recovery. As if that weren't enough to shake things up, TwinBee also has a co-op 2-player mode. Having a 2-player co-op mode is great on its own, but TwinBee's 2-player actually incorporates some really interesting features. So much so that playing a 2-player game actually feels vastly different than playing a 1-player game on your own. When playing a 2-player game, the first thing that stands immediately out is how each player can bump into another player. Doing so will cause you to move that player around, so you have to make sure you're not going to bump them into an oncoming enemy or shot. Once a connection is made in this way though, the most intriguing feature of this game can then be activated. Player 1 and Player 2 can line up their TwinBee ships to perform special attacks. By lining up the TwinBees horizontally, a very powerful forward-firing cannon will be able to be shot. This is much more powerful than even the twin shot is, and makes quick work of any enemy that it touches. When lined up vertically though, your shots will be changed into a spread shot. It's important to note that you can only perform these attacks when both TwinBee ships have their arms, otherwise you're out of luck. A 2-player game can also be played a couple of different ways, although because there's only 1 co-op mode, it's really just something that you can do for yourself. Basically, the game can be played for distance to see how many stages you can make it through, or purely competitively for points. Being able to share bells and power-ups with the other player is key to making it as far as possible. But if you're playing competitively for points, or if you're just a jerk, you can collect as many bells as possible to boost your score really high. Given that you can also bump the other player into enemies and their shots, it sure can make for some heated game sessions. Other than that, TwinBee isn't an especially complex game. Because there's no discernible end to the game itself, TwinBee is essentially just a simple score chaser and endurance run, since the 5 stages in the game are simply looped over and over. For being released in 1986 on the Famicom, the presentation isn't too bad either. It has some really catchy tunes, and the cartoony graphics are really nice to look at. Everything is very clearly defined too, which of course lends to the visual style of the game. Don't let the visual style deter you though, because this game gets really challenging really fast. And of course, as a competition piece, it's pretty timeless. And if you're like me, there's probably a lot of nostalgia attached to this game as well. For many people, Those old 71-in-1 game cartridges on the NES were most likely the very first gateway into import gaming that they've ever had, although the legality of it is questionable. And without an official North American release, I'm glad I had the chance to play TwinBee as far back as I did. But when it's all said and done, just how does the original TwinBee stack up? Let's take a look. When you consider how old it is, TwinBee sure is a pretty good game. By default, on the control front, it is a bit sluggish. There's a nice balance with 2 speed bells, but anything more than that, and your ship will move so fast you'll often find yourself running into enemy bullets far too easily. The length suffers a bit as well, with only 5 looping stages. However, if you're playing with another player or as a competition piece, it does have staying power. Despite the childish cartoony graphics, the challenge is also very, very high. And of course, when it comes to getting that high score, depending how far you get, it could get really hard to top it. The visuals and sound, while not the best, are very well suited to the early Famicom. The graphics are clear and easy to see, and although the soundtrack isn't especially diverse, the music and sound effects definitely won't make your ears bleed. Finally, on the ingenuity front, the relatively complex power-up system in 1986 really made TwinBee stand out, not to mention the really cool 2-player team-up attacks. So ingenuity definitely scores high. You can get a copy of the Famicom version for as little as $7 at auction. Although if you don't have a Famicom, you'll need a game converter adapter for the NES to play it, which on their own can be had for about $5. TwinBee is a game that I'll always go back to until the end of time, so not surprisingly, it's recommended.